And the third and final event in a 3-day teach-in organized by the student group Tufts New Economy with help from GDAE, the Global Development and Environment Institute. The teach-in has been part of an effort by the Democracy Collaborative called the Next System Project, which will continue sponsoring teach-ins across the country for the next few months. The Tufts New Economy student group was established in 2013 to address growing problems with the current economic system through both discussion and action. The new economy has many names and comes in many forms, but the common thread is that businesses, industries, institutions, and individuals working within the new economy prioritize people, planet, and not solely profit. TNE seeks to create new and tap into existing networks for both discussion and action toward a more just and sustainable economy. Last year's work culminated in a spring workshop titled Land, Wealth, and Community Control at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Roxbury. And the Next System Project's mission is to think boldly about what is required to deal with the systemic challenges the United States faces now and in coming decades. Responding to real hunger for a new way forward, building on innovative thinking and practical experience with new economic institutions and approaches being developed in communities across the country. The goal is to put the central idea of system change and that there can be a next system on the map. So this discussion is intended to focus on the local work of some of our panelists and the communities they work in, and then bridging the gap between that and a more system-wide shift. So now I'll give each of the panelists a few minutes to introduce themselves and their work, and then we'll begin the discussion and open it up for questions.
Okay, sure. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is, can you hear me well in the back? Yes, great. My name is Carlos Espinoza-Toro, and I'm currently a consultant in Boston. I do participatory planning as well as do project development and project implementation. Most of the projects and work that I do is related to urban sustainability projects. Since between 2013 and 2015, I worked as the Director of Community Organizing for the Jamaica New Economy Transition. And with that project, we implemented a hyper-local New Economy Transition projects in Jamaica Plain here in Boston. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alice Maggio. I'm the Local Currency Program Director at the Schumacher Center for New Economics in Great Barrington, which is out in the Berkshires. And the Schumacher Center is a 35-year-old organization, educational organization that works on testing out and educating about models that support the growth of just and resilient local economies or regional economies. We, in the broad universe of new economy work, we focus on two things. The finding ways that we can decommodify access to the commons, and that includes natural resources, land, and also decentralizing the issue of currency so that we can have regional currencies that serve as tools for regional economic development. And I work primarily on the Berkshires program, which is our local currency in the Berkshires, and related efforts around that, and I can tell you more about that.
I'm Neva Goodwin. I'm an economist. I'm recovering from the flu and my voice is weak, so I'm starting out trying to be loud enough to be heard at the back so that you can hear me say, if you begin to not hear me, raise your hand. My voice needs to sing. I'm the co-director of the Global Development and Environment Institute here at Tufts, and we have a policy arm and an education arm, and I'm most involved with the education arm because starting from the belief that there is a tremendous need for a shift in how the economy operates and a recognition that one of the things holding change back is the kind of economic theory that people are using. There are lots of sets up front, so don't be shy. The existing theory only looks at what goes through markets, which leaves out at least half of what matters in our lives. talk about half of what matters, that would be okay, but at the same time, that half interacts with the rest. So any economy operates within a context of society and the physical world. And that context is completely ignored in most standard economics. And then there are other issues. Again, what's outside the market includes the commons. It includes unpaid work. It includes a lot of values that motivate people. And at the same time, the standard theory has a whole lot of assumptions which are becoming increasingly obviously untrue and irrelevant and harmful. Assumptions like substitutability. The idea that if you run out of a resource, you can always substitute something else for it. Well, if we run out of water, we're probably not going to be able to substitute. We can't substitute Coca-Cola because that has a lot of water in it. Of course, probably some of you have heard of the term externalities, which I always feel that environmentalists should celebrate the fact that economists use that term, because it's the one little recognition that economists make that there are things which may be generated in or through a market, but that fall outside and don't come back with an influence. And so we always hear about pollution as an externality. The market may create, some market actor such as corporations may create pollution. If they don't suffer the consequences, they have created an externality. And in recognizing that externalities exist, economists are bridging the gap between themselves and the rest of humanity. So they are to be celebrated for that. But then the question is, how important are externalities? And you'll find a lot of economists saying, well, yes, there is such a thing, but it's so rare and small that it doesn't need to change our theory. If externalities, both positive and negative, are understood to be really important and major, and if we understand that, for example, corporate spending on political campaigns is an externality that comes from the ability of corporations to have huge economic power, then you begin to realize that the entire economy is riddled with these externalities, which, once you recognize that, the theory basically breaks down. So what I and my colleagues do is write textbooks, which is actually a lot more fun than you might think. I will stop there, but I just want to say that I have been involved with a number of new economy groups, and I'm just terribly excited. They are the leaders. We, in theory, are trotting along behind and trying to make sure that our theory keeps up with them. So excited to be here with you.
All right, so in our attempt to bridge the gap between the local and the systemic, maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the local projects that have been going on at the Schumacher Center and at JPNET. I definitely want to give Alice a chance to show off this amazing work here. But I think you want to start.
Well, Berkshires are a local currency, and I have actually have some, so I can pass them around. And they have to come back because they're real. So there's a lot of them. You can split them up and pass them in different directions. I'm also passing out a directory of all the businesses that take Berkshires. Berkshires, you can actually buy Berkshires at 3 different banks, 8 branches of 3 different banks in the Berkshire region in exchange for dollars. So you take $95, say, and bring them to the bank, and you'll get 100 Berkshires. So it's a rate of 95 cents per Berkshire. And then you can spend a Berkshire as if it was $1. So you're getting a 5% discount for spending Berkshires. And they're always convertible back. So if you want to bring Berkshires back to the bank, you can bring 100 Berkshires, you'll get $95. So it's better to keep spending them. So the idea is that in all of those businesses that take Berkshires, they're all local, they're all locally owned, because it doesn't really make sense for a non-locally owned business to take Berkshires, because they usually ship all their money right to the corporate headquarters, which is not in Berkshires. So we don't even have to police our list of businesses, because only locally owned businesses accept Berkshires. So when you're spending your money there, the idea is that you'll spend your money with a locally owned business, you'll think about where you're spending your money, and then they'll continue to spend the money and recirculate it. And that's like a reinforcement of what we already know as the multiplier effect, where if you spend $1 in a local store, somewhere between like, I don't know, 40 and 60% of that dollar is going to stay in your local economy. Whereas if you spend your dollar in a corporate, in a chain, only 13% of that dollar is going to stay in your local economy. So Berkshires are like a reinforcement of that multiplier effect. And at the same time, as you'll see, they're a really beautiful currency that has a lot of local significance. So this is W.E.B. Du Bois, and he is a sociologist who grew up in Great Barrington, which is where Berkshires are based.
I'm covering him.
And so we have local heroes on the front, and there's a woman on the 10 who started the first community-supported agriculture farm in the country, Robin Van Ende. A Mohican on the 1, Herman Melville on the 20, and Norman Rockwell on the 50. So those are all people who are significant to us in the Berkshires and have significance to a lot of people around the world. And we have local artwork on the back. So living local artists contributed artwork to the backs of the bills. And you can even see a mountain that is behind my house on the bills. And so it actually, that currency means something to you and helps to support regional identity. And not only that, but you think about where you're spending it when you have it in your wallet. It kind of, because you can't spend it anywhere or everywhere, you have to think about where you're going to spend it. So it also increases relationships between you and the business owner. And so that's actually one of the themes of our work, is this connection between consumers and producers, and finding ways to bring consumers and producers together to build the kind of economy they want, rather than have them always be competitors or at loggerheads, like usually is how we think about consumers and producers in economic thinking. So Berkshires is just one example of one of the kind of models that where we try to do that. Another is what we're working on right now is to kind of expand beyond Berkshires as a buy local program. We're building an initiative we're calling Community Supported Industry, which is definitely a takeoff on that idea of community supported agriculture. And it just because CSAs have become kind of so everywhere for us now, I think we don't even think about what they mean. But what's really interesting about a CSA is that it is bringing consumers and producers together to assure local production. So if you didn't have the local consumer buying in, literally, to that farm business, the farm business might not be able to have the startup capital at the beginning of the season that they need to produce for the local market. So that fundamental shift where instead of just buying the fruits and vegetables when they're ready, the person pre-purchases them because they want to have those ready later on in the season. That's the fundamental shift in CSA, the CSA model, that we want to bring to other forms of production so that we can have more local production. Because that's beyond just shopping locally, actually having more local production is what's going to help us create more diverse and resilient local economies. So that's what we're calling CSI, or Community Supported Industry, is kind of what we're working on now. And it, of course, incorporates Berkshires. Thanks. You can take your picture with it, Peter.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about JPNET?
Yeah, actually, I've got a couple of questions. How many of you have heard of the New Economy projects? And And how many of you have heard of the transition town movement? So the Jamaica Plain New Economy transition is an effort, it's a local effort in Jamaica Plain. Are you all familiar with Jamaica Plain? Great, okay, good. Stony Brook, Orange Line, gentrification. It's an effort to develop community resilience in Jamaica. That's really what it is. And it's a local effort, it's grassroots. As I was talking to Neva, actually, she mentioned to me that it would be a good idea for me to explain what do I mean by new economy. So new economy may have different definitions. For us, what it meant was a healthy tension, or actually just a tension between economic growth and the environment. That's what it is. A tension between economic growth and the environment. And I'll just give a very quick description of what that means, and then I'll go into the project. Chuck Collins, who is the director of New England Institute for Policy Studies, JPNET is a project of the Institute for Policy Studies, wrote an article, and he was talking to me before he wrote the article. He said to me, you know, in the past we have actually, we've had a great party. We've really got, you know, a lot of beer. We've really done anything we wanted with the environment, and now it's time to end that party. We have to finish this party, the party's over, and we need to look at the economy in a different way. So what I told him was, wait a second, I wasn't invited to this party. What are you talking about? So anyway, after that we got into a dialogue about what does it mean to have economic growth in order to have, for people who are actually trying to reach prosperity, for them to have the comforts and the life that others have had before them. And on the other hand, the environment. If we are going to have more economic growth, what does that mean to the decimation of the environment? So that's the tension that the Jamaica Plain New Economy transition wanted to address. We didn't want to address in a political manner because we realized that there was a lot of paralysis in a systemic manner. So we said it would be a good idea to actually just talk to people and ask them what they want to do. So that's really what it is. So the projects. Many projects actually came, you know, we started to work on many projects. One of them is called the Boston Food Forest Coalition. Have you ever heard of that? The Boston Food Forest Coalition? So the Boston Food Forest Coalition, it's a translation of that framework into what would it mean to have a food perspective on what would it mean to actually use land that belongs to the public for the creation of nuts and evergreens and vegetables. And what would it mean to involve people into working on that in a manner that they can actually harvest that for themselves? That's one question. That's one question of that. The answer is the Boston Food Forest Coalition. People come together in different sites. They do guerrilla gardening sometimes. Now they have a place at the Boston Nature Center. And the person directing that, which is now out of the JPNET umbrella, his name is Orion Friedman. So he's been working on this for many years. Another project was called the Cancer-Free Economy. The cancer-free economy means, what would it mean for us to keep our livelihood businesses and transition them to a newer economy where they can use carcinogen-free elements? So that translated into working with dry cleaners. So I specifically work with a dry cleaner called JMP Cleaner, which converted from using perchlorine, which is very, very bad for all of us, and it gives cancer, into actually using perc-free wet cleaning processes. So I work with them, coach them, provided them with the information and resources they need, and now they are thriving in Jamaica Plain, which is a very expensive neighborhood. Other project is called the time exchange. The time exchange is what would it mean for us to actually value what people actually can do and give them what they love to do, such as, for instance, talking to other individuals, listening to them, bringing food to people, exchanging cooking lessons, etc., etc. What would it mean to do that? Well, the answer is, why don't we have a time exchange process in which people actually could exchange time and get to know each other and actually get to know who they are and strengthen the network among their neighborhood. That's another project. And there's many projects like that. There were something about legalized chickens, and there are many, many different projects that people come up with and that we believe that the magical ingredient of the hyperlocalization is that it's very hands-on. People do the work right away, and in addition to that, we value what they have to offer immediately. There's no translation between a greater policy and what they're doing. However, we do understand that if we don't connect them to greater policymakers like the city level, eventually their efforts might not be very sustainable. So we have another mechanism called the state of our neighborhood. How many of you have heard of the state of our neighborhood? Okay, one person, great. It's a big event in the Jamaica Plain in which we bring elected officials to actually advocate for some of the projects that we're doing. And we connect elected officials at a policy level and what we're doing at a grassroots level. And sometimes it gets a little, contentious, but it's a great platform. So anyway, to wrap up, those are the projects that we've been doing. And in addition to that, just to finish up, one of the other challenges that we had was how do we add capacity to these projects so that they become sustainable? Volunteerism is important to what we do. However, we realized that if we only work with volunteers, we would not be listening to voices that must be heard, because not everybody can volunteer. So we created a system called the Community Leaders Fellowship. And in that system, what we did is we gave people professional coaching advice in exchange for their work. So we're doing an exchange rather than just asking for help. We're providing them with something that they needed, and they were actually involved in the work. And through doing the work, they're actually learning about what the new economy is. So I'll leave that there.
All right, so one of the common themes that I've been discussing and that Tufts New Economy has been discussing, especially those of us who are writing our theses right now, is the issue of scaling up. So, for example, my thesis is on community land trusts trying to create a larger network in the greater Boston area. So I think that's a common theme, and that's sort of something we're trying to address here. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you can take something that is local or even hyper-local, like a neighborhood, not just a city, and scale it up to a wider, maybe statewide, maybe just regional, maybe statewide shift. How can we draw those connections?
I'd start by saying that not everything should be scaled up. That there are some things which should be replicated over and over in different ways, but should always stay small. And being able to figure out which things can get bigger without losing their quality, and which things really cannot, is a very important issue. And it's a sort of a culture of this country that we always think of having one solution and having it really big. And sort of monoculture agriculture is, to me, the paradigm for that. There's one way to grow wheat, and you're going to take up 3 states and do it. And there's one way to grow corn, and you're going to take another 3 states and do that. And that's a very bad example of scaling up. So I just put that out as an important thing to do at all.
I would say the same thing, and my answer would be that education is the most important, and not just education in an institution, but education of our senators, of our policy makers, of our neighbors, everybody that you can reach, because that's how we can reach scale, is that the ideas permeate, and people see how they can become a part of it. I think having Carlos's different kind of models taught to other communities that could replicate them, or teaching about local currency and how you could replicate it in a different area, but then adapt it to your own region. I think that's the most important thing, is getting the ideas out there. One of the programs that we're doing under the umbrella of community-supported industry, we're calling Entry to Entrepreneurship, and it is a tiny little program, and it would be impossible to scale up because it relies on so many different relationships and little details. But we want to make it very replicable so that other places, or we want the idea to catch on so other places can do something similar. It's a business planning course for young people ages 14 to 25. And it's a business planning course that starts from a kind of new economy perspective, looking at what are the things that we could be making in our own community that we are currently importing, and seeing those as opportunities for new businesses. So we're asking our young people to not come up with what business have they always dreamed of because they're passionate about it, but what business do we need in our community, and then what is your connection to that opportunity, and how could you find a way to make that into a business plan? And the other element to this class is that it's actually taught by community members. It's not, I've been facilitating it, I've been organizing it, which is a lot of work, but it's not, I'm not actually teaching it. And so we have people who are experts in marketing coming in from our community, business owners coming in and talking about their own business as an import replacement business. Bookkeepers, lawyers, all these different people are now part of this class and teaching it, which empowers them and also educates them to these concepts, and also gets them all excited. I mean, you should see how people are knocking down our doors to be a part of this class, because they're so excited about the idea of teaching young people how to start a business, and a local business. And that's something that hits home for the Berkshires, because we have a declining population and everybody wants to see young people come back to the Berkshires and start businesses. But I think it's a pretty universal kind of want for older people to teach what they know to younger people. So this is a vehicle for that. And so we would like to make this accessible to other neighborhoods or communities that would like to do something similar. Because actually we've done it on very small budget. Most of it is just my time and a lot of organizing. We have donated space. There's very little materials. And so it's something that lots of places could do. So what we'd like to do is make a handbook so that we can share the materials we've developed, the lessons we've learned, and other places could do something similar. And I think that's the kind of thing, like the replication of what you were saying, is what we want. We have to enable that.
Yeah. Okay. Anytime. So, okay, great. So I just wanted to say that I agree with what you both have said. I can speak a little bit about the challenges of replicating something, but I also wanted to ask, in a much more framework manner, what is it that we want to replicate, and what is it that we want to scale up? For instance, the Boston Food Forest is trying to work with the city of Boston to acquire vacant land so that all of these pieces of land will be places where people can do urban agriculture. Is that beneficial for the city? I'm not sure, but you know what I'm saying? There's a replication element and a scale-up element there. And the challenges that they're facing as the city wants it to be sustainable. How are they going to generate money by doing so? When they make premises that we don't really want to involve money into this process. When we did the cancer-free initiative, when we started with one laundromat, we decided, why don't we work with the city so that the city can do a three-phase policy to phase out perchlorate in the next 6 years, by 2020. It's being phased out in California. Why can't we phase it out here? So the scaling up will be that we'll create incentive for other laundromats to change to a cancer-free element. Now the question there is, what is it beneficial? What is the benefit that we're trying to do? And how can we work in that manner so that laundromats basically just don't leave, the Massachusetts area? By the way, these are all these questions that we had about how do we scale up the projects. One of the things that came to my mind was also the objective of the individuals about the economy. The people that I was working with, laundromats, some of them, they don't see a laundromat as being necessarily a business that they want to continue forever. They actually see a laundromat as a way for their children to get a college education and then do something else. So the scalability may not be a policy to actually get all the laundromats to use cancer-free efforts and cancer-free materials, but I thought the scalability was to have a community land trust that ensures that any family could have a laundromat for 10 years or so to allow for their children to have education. So anyway, those are the kind of topics that we were looking at when we're looking about scalability. what is it that we wanted to scale? Was it the policy mechanism? Was it the goals of the individuals? We were not sure. So anyway, I'll just leave it there. It was just challenging.
Just coming out of that, one of the ways of creating scale is to get regulations. If, and your example of the dry cleaning is a perfect one, because at some point, if it can be shown that dry cleaners can survive and do a good job and have happy customers without using poisonous products, then sooner or later, maybe you can get legislators to regulate and say these products may not be used. So there's one of the ways of scaling is to actually get something into legislation.
All right, now I think we can open it up for questions. If anybody in the audience has any questions for any of the panelists.
I want to connect maybe that last point you made to the Berkshire. Can you talk a little bit about some of the, I'm sure myriad regulatory hurdles that you sort of face either now or in the future?
Well, it's actually not as hard as you'd think, because in this country, we've never lost the power to issue our own currency, or issue individual or private currencies, as long as it doesn't look like a dollar, or is the same size as a dollar, or is purporting to be a dollar. It's not illegal to issue your own paper currency. It is illegal to mint your own coins, and I think that's because when they wrote the Constitution, they thought that nothing really mattered except coins, so that's lucky. But in Europe, actually a lot of countries have lost the power to issue. The only entity that's allowed to issue money is the central bank in Europe. So in that way, they've lost a lot, and we still have that power. So what we would like to see is a democratic, locally based membership organization that's nonprofit issuing currency, and see many of those around the country, and then also a federal currency.
Just a quick follow-up, are you able to offer these businesses able to offer this compensation?
It's a little bit tough, but only because of technical things like payroll and paychecks services. So it's difficult to do in a normal, like if you're just being paid as a salaried employee, if you use a payroll service. Because the payroll service is often not local and doesn't necessarily understand what Berkshires are. But people do use them to pay contractors often, and also for bonuses or reimbursements. So often at the office, I take reimbursement in Berkshires, and I know a number of people who have travel expenses. They might be spending money on travels elsewhere, and then when they get back to their business, they actually reimburse themselves in Berkshires. So in that way, you can do it, but it is still a little tricky with paychecks.
How is it taxed? There was a 5% discount made for that.
So the 5% is actually, if you go with your $95, you're going to put it in a bank account that's owned by Berkshires Inc. And it's only there for the purpose of exchange. So it's sitting there, backing the 100 Berkshires that come out. And if you bring 100 Berkshires back, you get the $95 back. But you can do that at any bank. So it's.
So the banks can't lend them out?
They are actually in a checking account, so they treat it just like a regular checking account. But there has to be that liquidity in the bank.
Yes. So that's like 100% backing,
Yes.
which means that they can't lend it out.
Right. Yeah. But it's on their books.
Yeah.
But so that there's no real, the 5% doesn't necessarily go anywhere. The only time that it comes into effect again is if you are the business owner and take them back to the bank. Then you've just sold something for 100 Berkshires that you would have sold for $100, and you're only getting $95. So you gave a discount. But you can write that off as a business expense for marketing, and it would be like a credit card company that takes a percentage of the transaction. And then as far as taxes, you just report Berkshire's income as if it was dollars income. So 10 Berkshires in, you report as $10. And but you obviously have to pay the taxes in dollars. And there are regulatory issues that have come up because of Bitcoin and other digital currencies, but we've been able to work around those or deal with those because Berkshires are paper currency issued through the banks. So we don't, Berkshire's Inc. doesn't hold any Berkshires, doesn't ever make any exchanges. So banks are regulated already, and most of the new regulations that came up because of Bitcoin are for non-normal financial institutions. So they're like for money services businesses, but things that aren't banks that are doing exchanges. So because we work with the banks, we're kind of insulated from that.
I'm trying to reconcile the idea of like the community supported agriculture with the current economic trends seen by a lot of consumers and like even producers with like on-demand or instantaneous access to goods and services. So I was just wondering, like, how do you see the fact that, for example, like agricultural producers are getting paid in advance to do something at a future point in time? How do you see that relating to that other like growing trend of like instantaneous goods and services?
I think that's a really good question, because it definitely, the convenience factor is huge, and what we're talking about is not always convenient. So I think that it indicates that there must also be a culture shift, but there are things like food that you know you're going to have to eat, forever, and there are things that don't need to be demanded, like instant gratification, and you can plan for. So we like to focus on, if we're talking about import replacement products, we like to think of the most essential things like food, clothing, shelter, energy, transportation, things so that we could actually invest in the future production of them and know that we're going to need those. And so that comes to the idea of anchored institutions and anchor activation, where there are big anchors that are buying consistently products, and if we can shift that spending, or if we can say, have those anchor institutions say, well, in 5 years, we're going to buy all of our applesauce locally, then that would actually be bankable for an applesauce producer to start up, because they know that they're going to have demand. So that's a kind of, it's not convenient, it's not necessarily going to happen through an app, but that it would actually bring so much value to a local community that that's what we're working on.
The issue of culture change is really underneath all of this. And there were, when Carlos was talking about the party's over and so forth, that is the whole issue of consumerism, which is a major part of our culture. In the last 30 years, there have been 2 excellent books with the same title, both called How Much Is Enough? And the first one was by Alan Durning. And his conclusion was that the world has a sort of 30% of the world at that time, whose percentage may have changed, was living at a high consumption level, and 30% way below, an acceptable level. And the middle 40% of world consumers was what we should all try to converge towards. And this is what Chuck Collins and me were talking about, that the high consumers, the world cannot support people who eat twice a day, who take jet planes once a month. There are all these aspects of the high consuming lifestyle that are completely unsustainable, and yet which are desired by the rest of the world. And there's no way people are going to reduce their consumption without understanding what really creates well-being, and understanding that you can purchase less and consume less, or consume differently, and still have a good life. And there's an enormous culture change ahead of us, and that is what needs to be scaled up.
What about the question for the group? For those of you who are students, I was going to ask just a very quick question. My assumption is that we may all desire to graduate and get a good job. Is that correct? Right? High-paying job, probably. One of the things that we look at the economic transition is tying back to what Neva, Alice had mentioned, is that, yes, it is about movement building, right? It is about, I mean, everything that we do is about being able to transform the hearts and minds of the individuals so that our work could be replicable through people. And having these questions about these tensions between what I want and how that's needed and affects the benefits, how that affects society is very important. So during when we work with our fellows, we come together in retreats and we come together in meetings in which we talk about these questions. You know, what are our desires, as well as how can we look at our desires and what effect they're causing into what we're doing every day. So anyway, I just wanted to add that to the table, that movement building is a critical part of the work of the organizing that we do, and it's the work that allows for things to be replicable in a very viral manner, if you want to use that.
And I think it has to be a compelling vision of something different, not something that sounds like the end of a party. I don't think, that doesn't make me want to do that. I like parties, so it has to sound like a better party, I think.
Julia, sure, that's what she said. We're gonna have a better party.
It's interesting you brought up a textbook that focuses on feminism, and that's something that I think we should talk about too. Where do you see in the local work, where do you see intersectionality between economics and new economics and racial issues, gender issues, like that?
Oh,
Yeah, anyway, yeah.
On the local work, actually I wanted to just, I'll answer that. So in Jamaica Plain, we work across gender, age, and we also have a big community which is LGBT community. Is that correct?
Yeah.
We also work with another LGBT community, and when we have conversations about equity, I think what it comes down is, we think about how we can work on these projects so that the people who have not benefited the most will benefit the most. And the tensions come out when we talk about, well, who have not benefited the most. And that's when we have different communities, not grabbing, but pulling on their own interests. Well, I think, in the LGBT community, here we are trying to benefit as much as we can, the folks that we have with these different projects, and other folks, let's say, will come from the Hispanic community and say we'll have an agenda as well, and other folks may come from another background. And I think that at the end of the day, what we try to do is we try to really let them understand, or let everybody understand, that it is important to actually have a very good equity framework to work with. And we actually haven't nailed the nail on the head in that regard. But when we start these conversations without a very clear equity framework that is systemic, it really falls apart sometimes. And that's why I wanted to mention what you mentioned, Neva, in terms of books and in terms of theory. I actually think that's very important. That there are folks like here in Tufts that are actually trying to come up with new books, new theories, and new ways in which we can operate. We need that. We need equity frameworks and economic frameworks.
And we who are writing these books desperately need to be educated. I am one of the founding board chairs of the New Economy Coalition. And a couple of years ago, the staff began to roar off in the direction that a lot of the board didn't understand. I'm 71, I'm white, I've led a comfortable life, and the staff were insisting we're not representing the people who most need to be represented. And it took me a long time to get it. And one of the issues is there isn't just one English language being spoken in this country. There are a lot of different English languages. And cultural cues and ways of interacting. And us old white folks have a tough time hearing some of the other languages. And I'm happy that the New Economy Coalition has really taken this as its mission to allow the voices to be heard of people whose voices haven't been heard because they haven't been speaking the mainstream language. And for those of us who do speak the mainstream language, we have to be taught to listen and hear.
So we've got about 2 minutes left. Are there any final comments or questions?
I just have a question. So, I'm in the joint European economics program, and you mentioned a couple of resources just a few minutes ago. I think one of them is a book called "How Much Is Too Much" or "How Much Is Enough." But I was wondering, it's hard to whittle it down to like one or two, but if you had suggestions on resources and maybe books to read or papers to read, I would love to hear that.
I think I'm going to say go to the GDAE website, GDAE, and there are a lot of really good resources there.
And I'm going to pass around our mailing list. So if you'd like to hear about new publications, give us your email address. We also have a physical library with a ton of books.
That is true. That would be a good thing to do. Come visit us at 44 Teal Avenue. Go to the top floor and browse.
My office is on the first floor. Come show me your books and say, I'd like to check these out, and we can work out something.
Good. And then speaking of libraries, the Schumacher Center has its own library out in Great Barrington, so that is probably also a good resource to check out. In fact, Tufts New Economy is going to try to get a field trip out to Great Barrington. Check out probably when the weather improves a little bit, springtime, summer maybe. So keep your ears and eyes peeled.
And so our library catalog is totally online. It's not a lending library, but it has its E.F. Schumacher's personal collection and other personal collections related to our work. So you can actually find what we have online, see what's there. But if you want to see his notes in the margin, then you have to come to the library. But we also have a series of lectures, the E.F. Schumacher lecture series since 1980. So that is a huge, great resource because they're short introductions to people's work. Or actually not just introductions, but the really great lectures that encapsulate a lot of different topics in the new economy. And you can read those all online on ebook form, you can watch the video or listen to the audio, or you can order the physical copy from us. So our website is centerforneweconomics.org.
And also Chuck Collins, who writes about this economy framework. He has a library that you can come to at the brewery, 30 Germany Street, and those are the ping pong things.
All right, unfortunately we have to wrap up, but yeah, thank you all for coming, and we look forward to